What's going on, y'all? Today we got track every Michael Jordan playoff game for a decade. You know, Mike ain't choking no playoffs, none like that, man. So we here. Playoff might get different. So you're right. We do our research as a LeBron fan, man. I've been falling into the MJ rabbit hole. I'm seeing what's going on, man. We just gonna get into this. Links in the description. You know what to do.
Know that Michael Jordan was an incredible basketball player. For many people, he's the undisputed GOAT. And in the Thinking Basketball Greatest Peak series, our Patreon community voted him #1. But one topic that always comes up with MJ is his teammate quality. In 1994, Jordan retired, and without him, the Bulls won a hefty 55 games and played the Eastern champion Knicks to a near draw, leading some people to think he might have been playing with a stacked deck. Others think those championships were all about Jordan because he finally embraced the team game in 1991 under the Zen master Phil Jackson.
Now, here's what I'll say about that. You know what I'm saying? You see what he just said, though. That Bulls team was, you know what I'm saying? They was pretty tough. It was pretty decent. I was arguing with some of y'all in the comments. I think some of y'all was saying he wasn't that good or something like that. Only people that was good was Scotty and you know, things like that. But you see what happened right after he left. They went to the chip or something like. I think he just said that, you know. But Jordan, he saying he make it unfair, you know. It's unfair when he on the team. That boy was averaging 37, and the best defensive player in the league in 35. That's when I was like, all right. Once I seen that, take a step back. He might be the GOAT. Let's get back to it.
To help answer this question, we went back and tracked 129 Michael Jordan playoff games to compare MJ and his teammates to what we've learned over the last quarter century. As we've discussed many times, there's no easy way to measure how good an NBA player is. We use basic stats like points per game or shooting efficiencies in conjunction with more advanced ones like how much a player improved his teammate shot quality, but there's no silver bullet. What most of us are really trying to figure out is how much a player helps his team win, how much his presence impacts the scoreboard. And that's where one particular stat is always worth knowing, even if it isn't perfect itself. I'm talking about plus-minus, and playoff plus-minus has only been tracked since the 1996-97 season, which means we have no information on those early Jordan teams, well, until now. For instance, in 1988, a fourth-year Jordan won his first MVP and the Defensive Player of the Year in the regular.
I think that's the year he dropped 37, y'all. Average 37, my fault. You know? That is
season, well carrying the likes of Charles Oakley and Dave Corzine to 50 wins. The Bulls played 10 postseason games that year, defeating the Cavs in 5 before bowing out to the Pistons. And in that 10-game stretch, Chicago was outscored by about 4 points every 48 minutes Jordan was on the court. When he went to the bench, they were outscored by 8 points per 48, which is about a 4-point difference. As longtime Thinking Basketball followers know, 10 games is a really small sample, especially since Jordan only went to the bench for about 50 minutes during those playoffs. That means a few extra makes or misses would have a huge impact on those minutes that Jordan was off the floor. So to understand how Chicago performed without MJ, we really need to look at more games. In 1989, Jordan hit the shot over Craig Elo, and the Bulls upset the Cleveland Cavaliers, then took out the Knicks before running into the Pistons again. This time, Jordan's on-off looked very different. The Bulls outscored their opponents by 4 points every 48 minutes he was on the court, but were outscored by nearly 20 points per 48 when he was off the court.
Like,
That gives
things
us
like
27
that, man.
total games now, but it's still a noisy sample. So we went ahead and collected the 1990 playoffs and the 91 playoffs and so on. After sifting through over 100 Bulls playoff games, we found some incredible gems, including a ringing endorsement for the channel,
Thinking basketball every day.
and this incredible quote about not wanting to excel as a three-point shooter.
Point shooting is something that I don't want to excel at. And when you have that mentality, as I found out in the first game, of making threes, you don't go to the hole as much. You go to the three-point line and you start sitting there waiting for someone to find you. And that's not my mentality. And I don't want to create that because it takes away from my other parts of my game.
Michael was talking about threes because he made 6 of them in the first half of Game 1 against Portland back in the 92 finals,
different.
propelling him to 35 points before halftime on just 21 shots. Before that night, Jordan had made at least 5 threes in a game just once in his entire career, and he knocked down a half dozen before halftime. Thanks to the shrug, that legendary performance is still talked about 30 years later, but I don't think I've seen anyone mention what happened next in Game 2. Those 3-point shots were only half the story to Game 1 because Jordan was just as unstoppable from inside the arc, drilling.
Let me react to that video, man. I'm gonna put that at the end of this reaction now. Wait now. We're gonna see if there's another reaction that we react to that we should put. But if not, we're gonna put this.
8 of his 12
You know what I'm saying?
2-point shots. Poor Clyde Drexler was left in single coverage most of the time, and if it wasn't the patented fadeaway that did him in, Jordan used his quickness to drive by Clyde into space and then float in mid-range pillows. In pick and roll, the Blazers sent a second defender to jump Michael, but Jordan shed him for more mid-range magic. So when Game 2 rolled around, the Blazers radically changed their defensive strategy, first by doubling him in the post so he couldn't feast on fadeaways down there, and then bringing extra defenders when possible to help on his drives. And these adjustments did make a difference, leading to some turnovers and some easy scores for Portland. But they also put Jordan in a position to set up his teammates for wide open shots. So his most prolific 3-point shooting game in the playoffs led to one of his most prolific playmaking games in the playoffs, setting up open shot after wide open shot for his teammates throughout the night. Of course, even when they sent help, Jordan's individual scoring brilliance was still on display. There are 3 Blazers lurking here, and this time he spins away from the help, and that's just insanity. Since he finished with 39 points, Jordan's scoring pressure also created a ton of shots for teammates himself. Here's one in transition where he crosses right, hangs in the air, and kicks it out for an open 3, and he actually looked back to the trailer to freeze the defense before snapping it to the corner for that jumper. All told, I tracked a whopping 15 shots created like this for teammates, which is a hard number to hit historically. For perspective, in the entire 2011 playoffs, the single game high I tracked was 14. So Jordan was a playmaking machine in this game, despite also dropping nearly 40. Portland tried other defenders on Michael besides Drexler, but he took smaller players like Terry Porter or Danny Ainge to the post, and against bigger defenders, he was just too quick off the dribble, and that's one less big body to stop him at the rim. This was actually a theme during Jordan's first
Up his chest, go back, my fault.
Bigger defenders, he was just too quick off the dribble, and that's one less big body to stop him at the rim. This was actually a theme during Jordan's first 3 NBA Finals. The Lakers' starting 2-guard Byron Scott was too small for him in the post, and he torched the Suns in '93 because they lacked agile wing defenders who could stay in front of him. Actually, that Phoenix series was a perfect storm because they had very little rim protection once Jordan shed his defender, and his finishing ability made him nearly unstoppable. He was way too quick for Dan Marley, who lacked the foot speed to slide with him on the outside, and when the Suns tried a bigger forward like Richard Dumas, he was again unequipped to move with Michael on the perimeter. Tom Chambers is playing center here, and he's too deep under the hoop and barely gets above 9 feet on his contest because he's not a shot blocker. If Jordan blew by Dumas and Charles Barkley was at the rim, he offered even less resistance on these drives. When Phoenix went to a quicker defender like Kevin Johnson, MJ had a size advantage and took him right back to the post. In Game 4 of this series, Jordan scored 33 in the first half en route to 55 overall, and it wasn't just tactical mismatches, but more of his spectacular long-range shooting, although this time it was mostly from just inside the three-point line. In his greatest peaks profile, we saw a more physically gifted MJ. His first step was a touch quicker, his motor revved a little higher.
Right here, these the highlights. You could tell he in a different mode. That speed, that agility, that athleticism is on a peak level.
In his greatest peaks profile, we saw a more physically gifted MJ. His first step was a touch quicker, his motor revved a little higher, but by 1992 he became a deadly outside shooter, putting on displays like this during critical playoff games. This is from the closeout game in the first round of 1992, and Jordan would just regularly stroke long jumper after long jumper like this, and he did it while somehow maintaining great efficiency for his time, probably because this version of Michael was one of the greatest mid-range shooters in league history. One Real GM poster named Dipper13 tracked over 1,500 Jordan jumpers from 1990 to 1992 and had his mid-range accuracy at 51%, which sounds completely reasonable after watching him torture teams in these playoff runs. Some of these shots are basically works of art, and this was one of the best scoring displays I've ever seen, slicing up Miami in basically every phase of the game. The Knicks defended him well in 1992 and 93, even holding him to a 3 for 18 shooting game that year, only for MJ to go off in the very next game, dropping in 6 more threes in a 54-point outing to tie the series at 2 games apiece. So, even if Jordan lost a touch off his fastball by 1992 and 1993, he was still otherworldly. Which brings us back to our original questions. How did the Bulls perform with him in the game? And what happened when Jordan went to the bench during the 1990s? In 1990, Phil Jackson arrived and installed the triangle offense, which was mostly in full swing by the time Chicago hit the playoffs that year. The Bulls again bowed out to the eventual champion Pistons in 7 hard-fought games. But in Jordan's playoff minutes that season, the Bulls outscored their opponents by over 7 points per 48, a jump into championship-level territory. In 2 seasons, Chicago had completely reshaped the roster around Jordan, with Charles Oakley, Sam Vincent, Dave Corzine, and Brad Sellers out, replaced by Bill Cartwright, Craig Hodges, B.J. Armstrong, and Stacey King, along with the emergence of their supporting stars, Horace Grant, and of course Scottie Pippen. So in 1991, when the Bulls broke through, they were a whopping 13.5 points better than their opponents with Jordan on the floor, and they still outscored their opponents even when he went to the bench. In 1992, they weren't as dominant with Jordan in the game, but without him, lineups often spearheaded by Pippen, the Bulls again outscored their opponents. In 93, the numbers were similar, although his teammates were outscored by a few points when he wasn't in the game. Remember, we wanted to eliminate some of the noise by tracking multiple seasons. So if we combine these seasons and look at multi-year stretches, we start to see a pattern. As the years progress, the Bulls look better and better without Jordan, improving from a team with essentially no chance at a title to one that looks like a really good supporting cast in the playoffs. If we compare these numbers to larger minute stretches, Jordan's supporting cast went from the 0th percentile to the 37th percentile and ultimately into the top 25% of supporting players. If we include the 94 Bulls, who played 10 full playoff games without Michael, we see a pretty steady rate of growth into the mid-90s without Jordan in the game. Now remember, these numbers are still a little sensitive to hot and cold stretches, and more importantly, this is really about Jordan's value on the Bulls specifically. Who was his backup, or how did they structure the lineups without him in the game? With that said, I wanted to see how Jordan and the Bulls compared to other high-minute players who made deep playoff runs over multiple seasons. The horizontal axis is how good the team was when the player was on the court, and the vertical axis is how much the team improved with the player in the game. These are all the players who logged 1,500 playoff minutes and 500 minutes on the bench over multi-year stretches since 1997. The player with the largest change is David Robinson. The Spurs were 25 points better with him from 1998 to 2001. Although Robinson wasn't his team leader in minutes, so his lineups could have been more favorable for a stat like this. Among minute leaders, Shaq's Lakers were 21 points better with him in the playoffs from 2000 to 2004, and LeBron's teams were 19 points better from 2016 to 2021. Jordan's best stretch came from 1989 to 93, where the Bulls were 14 points better with him in the game, so this is a great number, but isn't quite as emphatic as Shaq's or even LeBron's.
That's what I was trying to tell some of y'all in the comments. Y'all was saying I was bugging. You know what I'm saying? I just had a feeling. that whatchamacallit, that those Bulls teams was just a little better than the teams Braun had. You know? It's just, you know.
The Bulls' best stretch with Michael on the floor includes that second three-peat, where from 1991 to 96, they were nearly 9 points better than the competition, short of Curry's monstrous plus 12, but still one of the best stretches on record. The 96 Bulls went an incredible 87-13, a record that still stands to this day, although the 1991 team was actually slightly better with Jordan on the floor during the playoffs. For those final three championships, Michael was older and less explosive, although for those final three championships, Michael was on the floor during the 1991 team was actually slightly better with Jordan on the floor during the playoffs. For those final three championships, Michael was older and less explosive, although he was stronger and craftier than ever. That strength let him operate out of the post, commanding double teams that freed up his teammates, and he could overpower defenders down there, and then, instead of an acrobatic finish, kick it out to a wide open shooter. Michael's size and body control really stand out in these years, feeling a defender on his back before spinning away to collapse the defense and set up a teammate. And even though he lost some of that quickness, he could still stop on a dime to create space, and despite all the jukes and spins, he just seemed to be in total control of his body at all times. This was never more apparent than in the evolution of his fadeaway, where he couldn't always out-jump his defender, so he had to alter his shot in the air. This meant changing the angle of his body and the arc of the jumper, looping it over a nearby hand. He also used the pump fake more to create a little extra breathing room to fire, and he could do all this while reclining his body at extreme angles while he was in the air. This is like a pool shark learning all the tricks and bounces of the table, his mind adapting in real time to lean back a little more or aim the shot just a little higher. His defense was also really impressive in those final Chicago seasons, using his strength and anticipation to contain the ball and maintaining a relatively high motor on that end despite being longer in the tooth. His hands were as destructive as ever, and he actually gambled less during those second three-peat years compared to his more chaotic style when he was younger, and even that risk-taking was often calculated and precise. As a result, he actually put up some of the more impressive plus-minus numbers in his playoff career, where the Bulls were outscored by 3 points without him during the 96 playoffs, but then crushed teams by 13 points per 48 with Jordan on the floor. The NBA officially started tracking plus-minus in 1997, and he looks great there too, as well as in 1998. So, what can we make of all this? Well, despite the noise in plus-minus stats, I find these numbers incredibly important for a few reasons. First, they affirm that Jordan's supporting cast radically improved during their title-winning seasons, not necessarily Michael himself. As we discussed in his Greatest Peaks profile, MJ looked superhuman before Chicago won a title. He just needed the right teammates to climb the mountain with. Second, both of the three peoples looked great when Jordan was on the floor, with their second 3-year run falling just behind Steph Curry's Warriors during the Kevin Durant years. And finally, Jordan does not actually look like an outlier compared to other greats when he was on the court versus off it. His teams were plenty competitive without him, and when he was in the game, other all-time clubs were comparably dominant. Of course, there's enough variability in these numbers that the best player ever isn't guaranteed to have the best on-off ever, so the debate will certainly rage on. But I'll leave you with this. After pouring through over 100 playoff games of Jordan and the Bulls, it's hard to find a more consistently impressive decade of playoff performances in the entire history of the NBA, and the numbers certainly back that up. If you want more detailed access to
That's the end of this one, y'all. You know what I'm saying? Nice little informational video, getting more information on what I didn't have information on. The Jordan and the Bulls, their championship runs, how they came up, how good they were. Yeah, man. Feel free to comment what y'all think in the comments. Make sure you click on the last reaction on your screen right now. You will enjoy it. Turn on post notifications. Tell me what videos you want me to react to next. Links in the description, man, and I'm out of here.